Welcome to the Interest Center's webinar on resource grants. We are excited to talk to you about this new opportunity today. My name is Teresa Griffith, and I am the Program Assistant at the Interest Center.
My name is Annie Glanden. I'm the Program Manager here at the Interest Center. It's wonderful to see so many of our members connected today as we talk about this grant opportunity for the upcoming academic year. So thank you for connecting and welcome. Today we'll be giving a very brief overview of our resource grant initiative. This is not meant to be a long presentation. We want to make sure that we spend time addressing any questions that you may have after we provide additional information about the grant process. We also want to thank the Lilly Endowment for their continued support and generous funding for this initiative.
We've disabled the chat function for today's webinar, but we do encourage you to type questions into the Q&A box during the presentation. We'll reserve all questions for the end. If you have specific questions about your school's project, you can send these privately through the Q&A box or email us after today's webinar.
Thank you, Teresa. Recognizing that some viewers may not be familiar with the Interest Center, we would like to begin today with our mission statement, as we often do. This will help frame our work under this initiative. The mission of the Interest Center is to strengthen theological schools by connecting their leaders to essential resources for mission vitality. And we do this through our values of excellence, service, and trust. We work to resource our member schools and provide you with opportunities to engage external resources that will help you further the mission at your institutions. One way that we work with our members is by providing individualized support through resource consulting. Resource consulting enables us to work with schools in exploring and identifying resources to help them meet challenges and opportunities. It also enables us to develop partnerships with our members as we walk alongside you in your work. It is under this resource consulting umbrella that we're able to offer this grant opportunity, and through this opportunity, learn more about the critical work at your institutions. Since 2013, when we first began offering this service of resource consulting, we've worked with close to 2/3 of our members in identifying and engaging resources that, when combined with your internal assets, can lead to change and renewal at your institutions. We're learning about issues that are on the horizon for you, the types of innovative projects that you're considering, and how you're engaging resources. We also recognize the financial limitations of implementing new programs and projects, so this grant opportunity can provide that additional support and allow us to share your good work with others. So what is a resource grant? The quick answer is that a resource grant is a matching grant of up to $10,000. If you are considering hiring a consultant, for example, and the contract is for $10,000, then we will fund up to $5,000 of that contract. I will note that the match must be in dollars. It cannot be in-kind contributions. And it's also another way that we can support you, our members. It's an opportunity for you to engage a resource, especially for schools that may have budget limitations, with the intention that the resource will enable you to address a challenge or take advantage of an opportunity. Maybe you're considering developing a new online program, but you don't have the funds to begin. A resource grant can help fund this work and get you started. Now I'll say a word about eligibility because I'm sure many of our listeners are curious about that. To be eligible for an Interest Center resource grant, first you must currently be a member of the Interest Center, a member school, in addition to retaining your membership during the grant period. If you're not a member, we invite you to join us and explore membership. We would be happy to talk with you offline about this if you're interested. You also cannot be a previous grant recipient. If you are unsure if your school received a resource grant last year, you can visit our website at intrust.org to see a full list of grant recipients. Last year was our first year of this initiative, and we awarded 35 schools, so we invite you to review this list before you submit a request. Here we'll talk a little bit about the types of resources that we fund. I'll say that our overarching goal is to fund new and innovative work that falls within our funding guidelines. We do not have a maximum number of grants that we are awarding this year. We have earmarked funding for it this year and next, and our hope is to award as many schools that fit our criteria. We ask that your requested resource be tied to your proposed work and your mission. It cannot be used for outside projects unrelated to furthering the mission at your institution. Your request should be something new to your school, not an existing or reoccurring project. Think innovative, think something new, something external to add to what you're doing. Resource grants are truly intended for forward-thinking, non-reoccurring work. On the next slide, Teresa is going to share a few examples of some of our currently funded projects.
Thank you, Annie. We have received many innovative proposals in the past. Examples of these include engaging a resource to develop an alumni association, engaging in a needs assessment, developing new online learning courses, and engaging a consultant for new work at your school. When you think resource grants, think impact, think something new. For more information about what we fund, visit our FAQs, which are posted on our website. Annie, can you share a little bit with our listeners about what we do not fund?
Sure, Teresa, I'd be happy to do that. I'm sure our listeners are pretty interested in hearing about what we do not fund, so let me share a few examples with you all. We typically do not fund salaries or hourly wages or scholarships for students. We do not cover the cost of subscription fees or annually occurring projects. Again, we want to fund new things for your organization. We also do not fund events that are targeted to the general public. We want to focus on funding projects that will benefit the key stakeholders of your schools. We also don't fund facilities-related projects. This could be the purchase, the sale, construction, or repair of a building. And lastly, we do not fund overhead. Now, of course, there could be some examples of things that fall within these categories that we could fund. So we really want to look at each request individually to take into account the full picture of the request. So as we get to the Q&A, we welcome questions and then later conversations, hopefully post-webinar, about your specific projects. Now we'll just say a word about our grant process. And again, as Teresa mentioned, all of this information is available on our website, intrust.org. If you go to our website and hover over the Programs tab, you will see a page specifically on resource grants that includes all of these steps. The process for us begins with sending us a letter of inquiry. We will be accepting these letters until April 5th, but of course you can submit letters anytime before then, and we'll talk a little bit more about letters on the next PowerPoint slide. An Interest Center committee will then review all submissions by mid-May, and then at the end of May, selected schools will be invited to submit an online application. This application will ask for more details about your project, the intended use of the resource that you want to engage, key personnel involved in the project, milestones, outcomes, and a budget. We want to know how, of course, you intend to use the funds. Applications will be due back to us on June 28th, and then grant agreements will be sent in July for signing. Awards will be distributed in late August, and then the grant period will begin on September 1st and run through August 30th of 2020. Again, a full overview of these steps, in case you can't remember after viewing this webinar, can be found on our website, intrust.org. So we thought we would give a little bit of information about the requirements for the letter of inquiry because we had so many questions around this last year. So we decided just to tackle this live during the webinar. We're going to ask that letters of inquiry be no longer than 2 pages and on your school's letterhead. In this letter, we'll ask for a brief introduction to your school, including your mission, as we talked about earlier. And also an explanation of your request, including the name of resources if known at the time, and the intended impact of engaging this resource or resources. I'll note here that we understand you may not be able to name specifics with the resource, the name of a consultant, for example, which is okay. We understand that those details may not be known at the time when you submit the letter. If you are requesting more than one resource, we ask that they be thematically related and not for separate projects. And lastly, we want to know how much you're requesting and how you will be able to provide the matching funds. On the next slide, Teresa is going to highlight just some helpful tips for the letter of inquiry.
Thank you, Annie. A successful letter of inquiry will have an introduction of your school and its mission, a description of the innovative project you wish to address, and the amount requested from the Interest Center and how those funds will be matched. A letter of inquiry will not meet the requirements if it is unclear how the request ties to your school's mission and priorities, is a request for an already existing project, or it does not address how the funds will be matched.
Thank you. Now I'll talk a little bit about grant reporting. We require 2 reports as part of this initiative. First, an interim mid-year report and a final report with budget. Neither report is meant to be cumbersome. The mid-year report is more of a formal check-in to allow us to learn about the status of your work, what you're learning, and how the resource or the resources you engaged are impacting your school. The final report will ask for those final learnings and takeaways. What did you learn from engaging this resource? What was the impact? Were you successful in meeting your outcomes? And I'll note that templates for these reports will be shared if you are a grant recipient. Again, I want to mention that an overarching goal for us is to share what you are learning from your work. As a resourcing organization, we want to broaden our communities of learning and share what we're learning through this grant process with our members.
At this time, we'd like to take the opportunity to answer any questions you have about resource grants or the grant process. Please type all questions into the Q&A box.
And I see we have some questions already.
So it looks like we have a couple questions here. One from our members is, will this PowerPoint be available after the session, or do we need to be taking notes? So hopefully, we took a couple notes during the presentation, but all this information is also available on our website, intrust.org.
Yeah, great question. And we would be happy to send out the PowerPoint slides and some additional information after this webinar to everyone who registered.
So one question we have here, Annie, is will a resource grant fund speakers as part of a program or idea?
Yes, that is certainly something that would fall within our funding guidelines. And as long as you explain in your letter of inquiry how you're engaging the speaker to further the mission at your institution, we would definitely consider that, consider funding that.
Great, thank you. Another question is, do we have to have matching funds assigned before submitting the grant or after is okay?
That's a great question. And I would say last year our experience was that some schools did not have the exact match lined up during the letter of inquiry. But if you can explain in your letter of inquiry how you intend to match, and then by the time the online application is submitted, if you're selected, then that would be acceptable.
So we have one question here. Can we submit proposals for more than one project with the understanding that you may choose to fund one or other, or just not both?
Sure. Yes, we would welcome as many proposals and letters of inquiry that you would like to send, understanding that we can only fund one grant per school.
Thank you. So some of our questions here are more specific to schools, so we will be answering all questions. Some of them just might be more specific to your school, and we'll answer those offline. So here's one here from our members. Can matching funds be monies already given by your institution for a startup?
Yes, I can't think of a reason why that couldn't be considered part of the match. I think that would be acceptable as long as everything, of course, is explained in your letter of inquiry.
Great. Here. We have a couple other questions. Where should schools send their letter of inquiry?
Great question. I don't think we mentioned that during the webinar. I will say that you are free to contact us at the Interest Center prior to sending in a letter of inquiry if you have any questions or if you just want to chat about an idea you have. But you can address the letters to me, Annie Glanden, and you can also send them to our specific email address for this initiative, which is resourcegrants@intrust.org. And that information is also on our website, but we'll make sure that we send that out to all of the registrants today.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Another question we have is about the letter of inquiry. Can schools run ideas by the Interest Center to see if they're appropriate for funding before submitting one?
Absolutely. We would welcome any conversation about your ideas prior to submitting a letter of inquiry. So you can feel free to reach out to us via email or phone. We'll make sure that we have our contact information up on our next slide before we go. So yes, we would welcome those conversations.
Great. And this is also about the letter of inquiry. Do the inquiries have to be mailed or can they be emailed to the Interest Center?
Oh, that's a great question. We would prefer email. I think that would probably be easiest for both parties. So you can send letters of inquiry to our email address, resourcegrants@intrust.org. But of course, if you would prefer sending them via snail mail, that's perfectly fine as well.
Great, thank you. Another one here is about the size of the project. So if the project is to be larger than the grant funds, do we fund part of projects?
Absolutely, and I will say based off of the grants that we awarded last year, there were a number that were, the request was part of a larger project. So absolutely, we understand that these funds may be used for something bigger than the amount that you're able to request.
Thank you, Annie. Another question we have from one of our members is, can grant funds be applied to equipment?
Yes, great question. Yes, that is a fundable resource, equipment, as long as, again, you can explain in your letter of inquiry how engaging that particular resource is helping you address an opportunity or challenge at your school.
Thank you. I think we addressed part of this within the webinar, but one of the questions we hear is, can a grant-funded program be open to the public, or is it strictly only open to the school?
I would say that question, I guess my answer to that question, a quick answer, is that it depends. So I'm a little curious about what that event may be. So I would welcome a conversation offline about that specific question. So we'll make sure we jot down your name and your contact information so we can talk offline so I can give an appropriate answer to that.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
See here. We do have a couple questions here about partnerships and schools working together. I'm not sure if we had any of this last year, but Annie, can you talk a little bit about what we might consider have schools working together?
Sure. As long as the request is for a resource that both schools are engaging, the request has to come, I guess I should say the request has to come from one school. So we can only fund one school around the same project. So if there are 2 or more schools involved in the project, just recognizing that the funds will go to one school for the project. And however those funds are distributed among the 2 schools is something we can maybe talk about during the process, if awarded.
Great, thank you. So we'll take another minute for any questions that are coming in, but in the meantime, we do have one here. Does a school have to return grant funds if the project changes direction during the grant period, or does the Interest Center work with that school?
That's a really good question, and something that we haven't quite experienced yet. So I would want to maybe have a conversation offline about why that may have happened. So I'd like to maybe take down your contact information and contact you after the webinar to get a better idea from you about why that may occur.
Great, thank you. Another question from a member here is, are the contents of approved projects from last year available for our reference during our own application process?
That's a great question. It's something we haven't thought about, but I think it's safe to say we wouldn't feel comfortable sharing that just now. We do plan to share some learnings from our schools in our magazine and possibly through a future webinar. But if you have more specific questions about things that you're thinking about, or just want an idea of some of the other types of projects that we funded, then we'd be happy to talk with you offline about that.
Great, thank you. Here's an easy question for you. Can you please share the web address for the Interest Center and the email to send letters of inquiry?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Our web address is intrust.org, that's .org. And again, if you hover over the program tab on our main page, you'll see a page for resource grants and then also another item to click on for frequently asked questions. And to send letters of inquiry, you can send them directly to resourcegrants@intrust.org.
Thank you. And we do have a question about how schools can talk to us before submitting a letter of inquiry. So that information that Annie just gave, please email any request to have a discussion to resourcegrants@intrust.org. One question more specific about what is fundable. Is advertising to attract new students to a school fundable?
Yes, absolutely. Marketing materials for advertising for students, for recruitment, for enrollment, yes, that's absolutely fundable.
Great, thank you. So we'll just take one more minute if anyone has any more questions. And again, some of the questions are a little more specific to schools, and we'd be happy to answer those offline so we can give you a really thought out, good answer.
Great. And right now, I'll just click over to our contact information for those who may have joined a little bit later or just didn't hear about the contact information about our email address. We also have our telephone number listed here. This is our main line. So as you're thinking through requests or you're talking to your colleagues and you have some interesting ideas, but you're not quite sure if they're fundable, please feel free, as Teresa mentioned, to reach out to us. We really would be happy to talk through any ideas that you have.
Thank you. That looks like that's all we have for questions right now. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We look forward to receiving your letters of inquiry and any questions that you may have. Please direct those to resourcegrants@intrust.org.
Thank you.